Today we're going to do a proper review of the Kirmuss Ultrasonic machine. It's a very interesting ultrasonic approach and suggests that you can not only surface clean, but actually restore records. We'll get into that in a moment. Our goal today is to do an unboxing for you to show you what comes with the machine and, of course, how to get the best out of it. We hope to do this in a pithy, direct manner. I'll tell you why. You could just buy it yourself and read the directions, right? Well, take a look at this, fellas. If you're an old guy with glasses like me, you're going to need to break out the magnifying glass. Lots and lots of directions. It doesn't stop there. There's more. And again, and oh look, on the back. More directions. More directions still. Front and back. And again. Yeah, he likes his words, Dr. Charles Kirmuss. So also you have a warranty card return here. Do not waste a stamp on this. If you do, it'll come right back to you. So that is our goal for today. Let's get to the Kirmuss Ultrasonic machine. Real quick though, we had to pick a record to clean. I always like to turn you on to new music if possible. This is the 1970 recording from the Art Ensemble of Chicago. If you know this band, you must have this particular record. If you don't know the band, they really are a fantastic culmination of both traditional jazz and experimental music. And this soundtrack in particular is fantastic. It's from a 1971 beatnik movie out of France called The Stance at Sophie. Great record, highly recommended. Let's get to the review of the Kirmuss. Let's take a second to go over what comes with the Kirmuss machine. First, I want to point out that this is the offering made available through Upscale Audio, which is a hi-fi dealer in Southern California, east of Los Angeles. The machine itself is identical to that which you would get from another dealer or directly from Kirmuss itself. But there are a few differences. One, it's badged with the Upscale Audio logo versus the anthropomorphized bunny that you'll see on the other Kirmuss machines. And there is one significant difference that I want to point out. The Upscale Audio version comes with 3 slots for full-size 33 1/3 records and 1 slot for your 7-inch 45s. I prefer that. However, the other version has just 2 slots for 33 1/3 and 1 for 10-inch records. So if you're a collector of old 78s and are considering this machine, in that circumstance, I would not get the Upscale Audio. I would go with the traditional offering. Let's take a look at the underside of the mechanism that actually rotates the records. It's pretty straightforward, and as you can see in here, there are little felt pads. This just sits pretty straightforward. It sits right on top and plugs in here via a little mini plug. We have their surfactant spray. This is a key to the restoration process. Comes in a nice packaging. I think they did a good job with this. This is basically 99% distilled water and 1%, let's get this right, ethylene glycol. That's an odorless, colorless, low viscosity chemical. It's used to make polyester fibers. It's used to make antifreeze for your car's engine. We use it though as a static spray to get the static charge going in the right direction. We'll talk more about that later. You also get a refill bottle of the same liquid. This is, of course, a drainage hose. Got to have that. The other differences with the Upscale audio is that you get 2 brushes, which is kind of nice. One for here at the machine, one next to your hi-fi system. That's the idea. And these are dual-purpose brushes. On one side, you have more or less a standard carbon fiber brush that we've seen many times. And then this is a very small micron brush designed to polish the record post-cleaning. We'll show you how that works once we get into a demonstration. This is basically a lazy Susan. I like the way this is designed. The idea is that when the record comes out of the ultrasonic machine, you apply the surfactant. It rests on this. It comes with a little pad to make sure nothing gets scratched. Also comes with for your 10-inch records, a smaller pad. You also get a microfiber cloth with the little bunny and an optician's cloth. This is used for drying off the last few droplets of water that remain after the restoration process. And then lastly, we have goat hair brushes. We'll show you exactly how to use these. 2 additional items that come with the Upscale audio package of the Kirmuss is this stylus cleaning fluid. We recently did a video on how to clean your stylus. Perhaps we'll update it soon. There's a link below, but we'd like to give this a try. I haven't tried it quite yet. And also these inner sleeves. Again, we've done a video on inner sleeves. Maybe we'll do an updated version because in looking at these, they look excellent quality. So more to come on that. Let's talk about the few items that you're going to need that do not come with the machine. The first thing you're going to need is distilled water. Lots and lots of distilled water. You're going to need 70% rubbing alcohol. For cleaning purposes, for those small velvet lips in the slots, you're going to need a soft toothbrush and a spray bottle with distilled water. Same distilled water that you have here, and I recommend having some sort of cloth to clean up spills. Let's now get into a demonstration of how to use this machine properly. First step is to fill the reservoir with distilled water. Of course, you want to make sure that the valve is closed. And you'll notice inside the reservoir is a minimum and maximum line. You want to get it as close to that maximum as you can. The recommendation is that you clean no more than 10 records before changing the water. And number 2, from the manufacturer, that you not leave the water sit in overnight. That means you're going to go through a lot of distilled water, particularly if you clean as many records as we do. So keep that in mind. Next step is to put 40 milliliters of 70% isopropyl alcohol into the unit. You don't want to use more than 40. The point is if there's any mold on the record, this is going to help kill that, and that's important. But you don't want to use too much, as you could possibly damage your vinyl. All studies indicate this low level, this low amount of alcohol will do no harm. So the next step is to turn the unit on and to go through the degassing process. There's an on-off switch in the back next to the plug. It'll automatically come on at 5 minutes. That's the normal cycle for the ultrasonic cycle. But we first want to go through the degassing by hitting the pulse button twice. You hit it once, you'll see it goes to 136. This degassing process is actually very important, and surprisingly, a lot of ultrasonic cleaners, at least those designed for vinyl records, do not include a degasser. The idea is that once you go through the degassing process, the bubbles become much smaller, so when they cavitate next to the vinyl, they're more likely to get in deep into the groove. So it's theoretically a deeper cleaning process. It's recommended to go through this process twice. There are 3 individual ultrasonic units in the base of this machine, which is nice. It's also important that the cavitation process comes up from the bottom. It's not shot from the side. I think that's a superior way to do it. In any case, let's give it its second degassing. Okay, now that the degassing process is complete, we go ahead and put the, I call it the rotisserie, the top that rotates the records. Simply rests on top. Nice fit, no problem. Plug it in the side here. And now we're ready for our first ultrasonic cleaning. So, something to note about the Kirmuss. If you were to just use this as most ultrasonic cleaners are used, that is one time through an ultrasonic bath, if that's your intention, I would not recommend the Kirmuss for a couple of reasons. This is really about a restoration process, which you'll see in a moment. But for one thing, the Kirmuss has no drying method. The records will tend to be dry when you go through the restoration process, but if you're just doing a surface cleaning, as most ultrasonic machines are intended to do, the Kirmuss is going to leave your record wet. So this is really for the serious record collector audiophile that wants a truly deep clean. So do keep that in mind. The unit itself can overheat. It's not recommended to use this for more than 35 minutes at a spell. Now something like the KL Audio, that is built like a tank. It can go for hours on end. But of course it's a very different machine than the Kirmuss. It does have a dryer built into it. It's probably the ultimate and set and forget kind of ultrasonic machine. This is much more of a hands-on process, but I just wanted to be upfront with you. No drying mechanism in this, and you really have to go through the complete restoration process, which you'll see in a moment, to understand how the record is intended to be dried. Another thing, I think we can all agree that a general surface clean from any reasonable ultrasonic machine or suction type machine or something like the Loracraft, a string type machine, is far superior to not cleaning at all. The idea here, though, is that even if the record has been previously cleaned, there's likely to be a film left on it. Is that better than having chunks of crap in your groove? Absolutely. But I did talk with Dr. Kirmuss about the idea of pre-cleaning records. He generally doesn't recommend it, but when I pointed out, well, I don't mind going through one additional cycle to remove any film that might be from a pre-clean process, and secondly, the idea of keeping as much gunk out of the tank makes a lot of sense. So if you're dealing with an old and dirty record, I would recommend pre-cleaning it on something like a suction type machine before putting it into the Kirmuss. So the recommended process is to actually, again, 5 minutes is your first initial cleaning. That's going to give you your first surface clean. The recommendation is to start the ultrasonic process and then insert the record. And before it starts, so you can hear me clearly, I want to make this suggestion. Be careful to place the record directly down at a 90-degree angle into the slot. If it's off just a little bit, it can miss the roller mechanism. Okay, so let's get it in for its first initial ultrasonic cleaning. Okay, there you go. That's the first initial step, 5 minutes of an ultrasonic clean. Basically, that's the kind of surface clean that most ultrasonic units would provide. And if you took this out, although it doesn't have a drying mechanism and you could just let it air dry, it would be akin to what a standard ultrasonic unit is capable of doing. But what we're going to do is apply the surfactant, and in doing so, accomplish two things. One, bring up any residue that is attached, that is still clean to the vinyl. And secondly, and this is the most important aspect, this is the key behind this entire restoration process, is to deal with static electricity. The idea is to ensure that the static charge within the water, within the ultrasonic bath, is opposite from what's on the record. It's akin to two magnets. If their poles are the same, they tend to repel one another. We want them to be opposite so they attract. That's the idea of allowing a deeper and deeper clean as you go through this process. Visually, there'll be cues as to what's being picked up off the record. You'll see that in a moment. One thing we neglected to film, just wanted to point out, the recommended process before your first go-round, your first 5 minute ultrasonic bath, is to use the carbon fiber brush side of this brush and just give it a quick clean. You could also use a Giotto blaster, though Charles Kirmuss suggests that that would add more of an electrical charge than would this. He could be right about that. Let's get back to the next step on this record, which is to remove it from its slot. And by the way, it doesn't matter which of the 3 slots you choose. And of course, once you get into a routine and are cleaning multiple records, you can have them all going at once, space them a minute or 2 apart, and you can get rather efficient at that. But once it's gone through its initial 5-minute ultrasonic bath, you take it out. It's going to still be wet. Place it on the Lazy Susan with its pad. And then we utilize the surfactant. And the idea is to spray 3 times around the record and to utilize one of the goat hair brushes. Let's set the other one aside. We will use that one later, but you want to keep that one clean. We want to keep this one clean as well, but we want to dedicate this one to this process where we basically go around the record. This is not about trying to rub out any dirt. What we're doing here is spreading the surfactant evenly across the vinyl surface. And in doing so, you'll see some clouding. On an extremely dirty record, it'll almost look like a chalky substance. You don't have to go too crazy with it. Once we've applied the surfactant, the real key behind this is that we've addressed the static charge that's on the record and brought it back to the opposite of what's inside the tank. And obviously you want to do both sides. 3 squirts, basically evenly spaced around the record, and again with the goat hair brush. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. There's some right here. You see that sort of white chalky substance? That lets you know that there is still a film on this record of some sort. And no, I'm not going to say this is mold release agent or just residue left from previous cleanings or whatever it might be. But definitely something is on there. And frankly, whether it is or not, what's most important is the static charge that this applies to the record. Again, opposite from this one. So, back in for another 5-minute clean. Okay, that is the end of our second 5-minute cycle. Before we take the record out, I want to make mention of care of the goat hair brush. I like to clean it between each use. We'll talk in a moment how many times you have to do it on any given record, but in between each cycle, I like to give it a little shot of distilled water and just wipe it on the microfiber cloth. That's really all you need to do to keep it clean. It's very common to have water droplets there. That's why I keep a little towel, just to keep that nice and tidy. Okay, before we get to it, let's address the question, how many times do we have to apply this surfactant and use the goat hair brush? The key is to look for 2 things. One, how much of that grayish, milky substance are you pulling up from the record when you apply the surfactant? And secondly, how much water remains on the vinyl after the cycle? It's really amazing, and part of this has to do with having a bit of alcohol in the water, but it comes out pretty darn dry, which is amazing when you think about the fact that there's no drying mechanism there. In any case, when I still see some large droplets like this, and I know I've only been through one, there's still some film here and there, that tells me I want to put it through a third 5-minute cycle. 3 sprays, goat hair brush, and immediately I begin to see that grayish, milky film pop up. I hope you can see that with the camera. There you are. And the other side. Really like this mechanism here. Of course, you could set it directly on a microfiber cloth, but I do like that it keeps it up off that cloth. And we're not pressing so hard that you have to worry about damaging the vinyl. If you're pushing it that hard, you're doing it too hard. It's just meant to spread the surfactant evenly. I kind of go both directions, basically, in a clockwise motion. How many times we go through this cycle will depend on how much dirt is on a record, how old that dirt is, how many times it's been cleaned previously, what film is remaining. Let your eyes be your guide. If the milky gray white substance continues to pop up and the water beads continue to remain, you probably need to go through another cycle. Eventually, there'll be very little of that gray substance, and the water that remains will be very few droplets and very tiny droplets. You know you're finished at that point. But we're definitely going to go through a third cycle here. Okay, we're at the end of our third 5-minute cycle. Before we remove the record from the machine, I want to point out just a couple of things on the control panel. First of all, there are options to change the time from 5 minutes. That's the default setting. You can go higher or lower than that. I've played around with that a little bit, and frankly, I think 5 minutes is just the right amount of time for a cycle. And secondly, if you look just below the timer, you'll see a green bar. That has nothing to do, that's actually a heat indicator, but has nothing to do with the heat of the water. There are some ultrasonic machines that will actually heat the water, and that's great for cleaning things like jewelry. We don't want to do that with vinyl records, however. But what this heat indicator does tell you is if the machine itself is overheating. And as we mentioned earlier, this can overheat. It's recommended not to use it for more than 35 minutes at a stretch, unlike the KL Audio that can go for hours on end. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just it's a cost containment thing. So with that said, we're going to take this out and we'll ask ourselves, should we go for a fourth cycle? And I still see a tiny bit of residue left. Although the water is beating up nicely that does remain, there's a little bit less of it, but I think we could use one more cycle. I mean, how many times are you going to put it through this cycle? That's a personal question to be asked. If you're utilizing this machine in a true restoration process, I suspect it's an important piece of music for you. And secondly, what kind of music is it? If it's dense, distorted, bombastic, heavy metal kind of music, the nuances are probably not that important. Whereas if there are soft passages, long, sustained notes, you might think about doing it one or two extra cycles from what you would normally. So that's something else to keep in mind. I do think this could use one more cleaning, so let's get to it, or one more ultrasonic cycle. So again, with the surfactant. We've cleaned this brush off camera, and I am still seeing, although a bit less, that milky white substance come forth. Yeah, quite a bit of it's still there. It could be different from one side to another. And we're ready for our fourth cycle. By the way, I've done as many as 6 cycles, so that's the most. Okay, that is the end of the fourth cycle, so we have a total of 20 minutes of ultrasonic cleaning. Let's take it out and take a closer look. I am thinking, I don't know if you can see with the camera, but there are far fewer droplets and they're quite small. This tells me we're probably there. And for this particular album, I'm going to call this one finished. The process, what do? There's still some water on the record. And I admit, when I was first considering purchasing this machine, I thought, without a drying mechanism, what are we to do? Should we put it in the drying mechanism of the KL Audio? Should we put it on the Loracraft and have it suck up the remaining water? But I was very surprised about how little water remains on the vinyl. And I like the recommended process, which is to take this this cloth that's designed for fine glasses, optics, and so forth, and simply wipe up the remaining water. It'll come right up. There's very little water on there, which I think is pretty impressive, frankly. I like to go ahead and get it on the other side as well. I wouldn't want to just let that air dry. I think that would be a mistake. Although it's distilled water, there can still be a material that you don't want to dry on the record. So there you go. That record is nice and dry. But we are not finished yet. The next step is to go back to our brush. And as I mentioned before, this is a standard carbon fiber brush for an initial treatment to remove large items. But the other side, this is intended to give a final polish to the record. And I admit, at first, I was a little skeptical, but by golly, I think this does a great job. Turn it a little. Complete that process. Just a back and forth motion, cover a quarter to a third of the record. You don't want to press too hard. Remember, this is lifted up off the surface of the table with the Lazy Susan beneath. And then ditto for the second side. The individual bristles on this side of the brush are incredibly small. You can get deep into that groove. And there you have it. Now, our final step, the second goat hair brush. We keep this one separate because this is designed to neutralize any static that has been built up on the record after the final cleaning and brushing. And the idea here is to go back to our surfactant, but you don't want to spray it directly on the record, just the slightest bit on the brush itself. And we do this much like a woman would apply perfume, spray it up into the air and walk into it. It's kind of the same idea here. So give it a spray and just let it sort of catch on there. This is very similar to using a zerostat, which is also designed to neutralize static. I think this process works a little better. And there you have it, a fully clean and restored record. We'll get it on the stereo and have a listen before we give you our final thoughts. Final thoughts and for the record. First, a quick note on the music. This is one of my favorite records. I highly recommend it to anyone who's into jazz or experimental music. Check out side one, first song, side one, Theme to Yo-Yo. Features the wonderful singer Fontella Bass, I believe her name is. She was the wife of Roscoe Mitchell at the time that they recorded this. I would also recommend this to any young guys out there playing bass. If you're a bassist, check out Malachi Favors, one of the most grounded guys in the history of jazz. Mother Earth grounded. Really a fantastic player and a great album. Let's get to the Kirmuss. So, in using this machine and getting to know it, I made note over the last several weeks as to the pros and cons, what the machine is best suited for, and perhaps what it's not. So, with that, I've made some notes I'd like to share with you. Let's start with the cons. The first thing is this is not the most convenient of record cleaning machines. That should have been obvious during the demonstration. If you're the kind of guy that wants to drop a record in a cleaning machine and have it do its thing and pick it up at your convenience, this is not what you want. You'd want something like a KL Audio. But if you're really into restoring and want to get the absolute cleanest records possible, this is where you want to consider the Kirmuss. It's also time consuming. You saw that we went through four 5-minute ultrasonic cycles and the applying the surfactant in between. This is time consuming, so it's probably reserved for your most treasured records in that instance. I would also state that as one of the cons that the machine itself, it's fine looking, but it's not particularly attractive. It has an industrial-like character to it. If the look of a machine is important to you, if you're displaying it in your living room and you want it to look good, physically look good, then you'd be better off with something like the KL Audio, certainly the LoraCraft string-type machine, which is just a stunning piece of gear, or perhaps the Clear Audio suction-type machine. All beautiful machines that do good work. The next on my list of cons has to do with the mechanism itself. In the ultrasonic, it can overheat with the Kirmuss. 35 minutes is the maximum that you would want to use it in any stretch. So keep that in mind. Probably fine for most guys, but if you're cleaning a ton of records, you're going to have to shut it off periodically and let it cool down. That's not the case with something like the KL Audio. It's built like a tank and can go on forever. And then lastly is the amount of distilled water that you'll be using. Keep in mind that the manufacturer recommends no more than 10 records at a time be cleaned in a particular bath. If you do pre-clean it, that could probably allow you to get more records out of one fill of the tank. But 10 is not all that much. And on top of that, it's recommended that you drain the machine every night. It's not meant to keep the water in that basin. So you're going to go through a ton of distilled water. With that said, there are a lot of pros, I should say, to the Kirmuss machine. Ultimately, I would say I think this is the best machine for a true restoration process. I really do feel that way. Some other things that are pros about the Kirmuss: you can do multiple records at once, which I think is great. It'll accommodate your 7-inch 45s, which is fantastic. If you're into 78 shellac discs, you don't want to get the version that is provided through Upscale Audio. Get the standard Kirmuss version. It has a slot for 10-inch records. Pretty neat for you guys that collect those. I love that it has a degassing feature. Not all ultrasonic machines do, so that's a big pro. Easy to use ultrasonic functionality, very straightforward. I like that. And I like the packaging of the spray bottle and so forth. It's well made, custom made for Kirmuss, and I think they did a very nice job. It's well branded in that regard. So overall, I think this is a fantastic ultrasonic process if you're willing to put the time into it. Last thought though, we still have hanging over our heads the great debate of the mold release agents. I'm not going to take a side on this. I don't know. I'm not an expert in what sort of chemicals and compounds are used to press a vinyl record, but I'd like to put a challenge out there. We have on one side Dr. Charles Kirmuss himself, who says there is a mold release agent, or better stated, I think a stamper release agent, within the puck that ultimately gets pressed into a vinyl record, and further, that agent leaves a residue on the record, and his process will clean that off. That's his contention. On the other side, you have guys that will say, nope, there's no way. There is no vinyl release, or there is no mold release agent. And if there is, it doesn't leave a residue on the record. Guys can get really passionate about that. One such fella is on Audio Asylum. I've mentioned Audio Asylum before. It's one of the great chat rooms for audiophiles, record collectors, and music lovers, along with Steve Hoffman's website. His handle is Beach Cruiser. I'd love to put a challenge out to Beach Cruiser on one hand and to Dr. Charles Kirmuss on the other. I'd be happy to host a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting where we can have this debate. and discuss mold release agents, kind of get to the bottom of this contentious issue. What do you think, guys? Comment below. We'd love to hear from you. You want to get people get their ire up, bring up topics like UFOs, Sasquatch, who built the original pyramids. You'll get some pretty heated battles, but nothing like the idea of mold release compounds. Yeah.